The Saints' Everlasting Rest by Richard Baxter, Hebrews 4:9. Chapter 1, the text explained. It was not only our interest in God and actual fruition of Him, which was lost in Adam's fall, but all spiritual knowledge of Him and true disposition towards such a felicity. Man has now a heart too suitable to his estate, a low state and a low spirit. And when the Son of God comes with recovering grace and discoveries and tenders of a spiritual and eternal happiness and glory, he finds not faith in man to believe it, but as the poor man that would not believe that anyone had such a sum as £100, so man will hardly now believe that there is such a happiness as once he had, much less as Christ hath now procured. The Apostle bestows most of his epistle against this distemper. My text is his conclusion, after diverse arguments, a conclusion so useful to a believer, as containing the ground of all his comforts, the end of all his duty and sufferings, the life and sum of all gospel promises and Christian privileges, that you may easily be satisfied why I have made it the subject of my present discourse. What more welcome to men, under personal afflictions, tiring duty, cessations of sufferings, than rest? What more welcome news to men under public calamities, unpleasing employments, plunderings, losses, sad tidings, which is the common case, than this of rest? Hearers, I pray God your attentions, intention of spirit, entertainment and improvement of it, be but half answerable to the verity, necessity, and excellency of this subject, and then you will have cause to bless God while you live, that ever you heard of it, as I have that ever I studied it. The text is the Apostle's assertion in an entire proposition, quote, therefore, i.e., it clearly follows from the former argument, there remains. As the bargain remains after the earnest, the performance after the promise, the antitype after the type, and the ultimate end after all the means, a rest to the people of God. God hath a twofold people within the church, one his only, by a common vocation, by an external acceptation of Christ, and covenanting, sanctified by the blood of the covenant, so far as to be separated from the open enemies of Christ, and all without the church, therefore not to be accounted common and unclean in the sense, as Jews and pagans are, but holy and saints in a larger sense, as the nation of the Jews and all proselyted Gentiles were holy before Christ's coming. These are called branches in Christ, not bearing fruit, and shall be cut off. But God hath a peculiar people, that are his by special vocation, cordial acceptation of Christ, internal, sincere covenanting, sanctified by the blood of the covenant and Spirit of grace, so far as not only to be separated from open infidels, but from all unregenerate Christians, being branches in Christ, bearing fruit, and for these remains the rest in my text. To be God's people under his dominion is common to all persons, even open enemies. To be his by a verbal covenant and profession, and external call is common to all in and of the visible church, even traitors and secret enemies. But to be his by election, union with Christ, and special interest is the peculiar property of those that shall have this rest. Is it to the people of God upon certainty, or only upon possibility? The promise is to believers, which they may, though but imperfectly, know themselves to be, and though it be yet upon condition of overcoming and abiding in Christ, and enduring to the end, Yet that condition being absolutely promised, it still remaineth absolutely certain upon promise. Though God's eternal purpose gives us no right to the benefit, yet the event or fruition of it is made certain by God's unchangeable decree, his eternal willing it, being the first and infallible cause that in time it is accomplished or produced. Chapter 2. This rest defined. Though the sense of the text includes in the word rest all that is ease and safety, which a soul, wearied with the burden of sin and suffering, and pursued by law, wrath, and conscience, hath with Christ in this life the rest of grace, yet because it chiefly intends the rest of eternal glory, as the end and main part, I shall confine my discourse to this last. Rest is the end and perfection of motion. The saint's rest here in question is the most happy estate of a Christian, having obtained the end of his course, or it is the perfect, endless fruition of God by the perfected saints, according to the measure of their capacity, to which their souls arrive at death, and both soul and body most fully after the resurrection and final judgment. I call it the estate of a Christian, though perfection consists in action, as the philosopher thinks. To note both the active and passive fruition wherein a Christian's blessedness lies and the established continuance of both, our title will be perfect and perfectly cleared, ourselves and so our capacity perfected, our possession and security for its perpetuity perfect, our reception of God perfect, our motion or action in and upon him perfect, and therefore our fruition of him, and consequently our happiness, will then be perfect. I call it the most happy estate, to difference it not only from all seeming happiness, which is to be found in the enjoyment of creatures, but also from all those beginnings, foretastes, urns, first fruits, and imperfect degrees, which we have here in this life, while we are but in the way. It is the chief good which the world hath so much disputed, yet mistaken or neglected, without which the greatest confluence of all other good leaves a man miserable. I call it the estate of a Christian, where I mean only the sincere, regenerate, sanctified Christian, whose soul, having discovered that excellency in God through Christ, which is not in the world to be found, thereupon closeth with him, and is cordially set upon him. I do not mean every one that, being born where Christianity is the religion of the country, takes it up as other fashions, and is become a Christian, he scarcely knows how or why, nor mean I those that profess Christ in words, but in works deny him. It is an estate to which many pretend, and that with much confidence, and because they know it is only the Christians, therefore they all call themselves Christians. But multitudes will at last know, to their eternal sorrow, that this is only the inheritance of the saints, and only those Christians shall possess it, who are not of this world. I add that this happiness consists in obtaining the end, where I mean the ultimate and principal end, not the end of conclusion in regard of time, for so every man hath his end, but the end of intention, which sets the soul a work, and is its prime motive in all its actions. How much doth our everlasting state depend on our right judgment and estimation of our end? But it is a great doubt with many whether the obtainment of this glory may be our end, nay, concluded that it is mercenary, yea, that to make salvation the end of duty is to be a legalist, and act under a covenant of works, whose tenor is, quote, do this and live. And many that think it may be our end, yet think it may not be our ultimate end, for that should be only the glory of God. I shall answer these particularly and briefly. It is properly called mercenary, when we expect it as wages for work done, and so we may not make it our end. Otherwise it is only such a mercenarianness as Christ commandeth. For consider what this end is. It is the fruition of God in Christ, and if seeking Christ be mercenary, I desire to be so mercenary. It is not a note of legalist, neither. It hath been the ground of a multitude of late mistakes in divinity to think that do this and live is only the language of the covenant of works. It is true in some sense it is, but in other not. The law of works only saith, quote, do this. That is, perfectly fulfill the whole law and live, that is, for doing. But the law of grace saith, do this and live too. That is, believe in Christ, seek him, obey him sincerely as thy Lord and King, forsake all, suffer